Hey, thanks everyone for joining. And Deborah Houlding has joined me today to talk about her life and her story of life as an astrologer. So, thanks, Deb, for joining. It's been a long time coming. So, I'm very glad that we are doing this today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
So, I think we did this kind of was planned before 6 or 7 months, but so that's the kind of crazy schedule that you have. Uh, so which is even more kind of humbling and honoring to be doing this at some point of time, because I've always, as I said offline, skyscript is almost a simultaneous activity of everyone's life who is some attached to traditional astrology, and more so for people who are very much into horary astrology. So I've always been waiting to kind of have a discussion with you, and I'm just glad that we're doing this today. So going back, so I've been doing this for. I just did 3 or 4 videos. I met 3 or 4 astrologers to talk about their lives and their experience as an astrologer. The reason why I'm doing this is basically to kind of put out the story of astrologers uh, out there, um, to kind of serve as an inspiration to the younger generation of astrologers. And another thing is, it's always great to hear the stories of astrologers as to how they got hooked up with astrology, and how, I mean, every story is unique. So let's hear it from you. So let's start about your pre-astrology days, and what were you like a little girl, and how did you grow up, your entire domestic family setup, and all those things. And yeah, let's start.
Okay, so about my background and childhood, you know, I had just a very normal childhood, normal background. Working class parents, hardworking working class parents. My father was a miner, long line of miners in the family. My grandparents were miners, my uncles were miners, my brother was a miner, my father-in-law was a miner. I was brought up in a mining community. Um, my husband came from a mining community, but he didn't. He at a young age, his he decided he didn't want to be a miner. He wanted to be a plumber. So I married above myself when I married my husband. But I married very young. I was 19 when I got married to my husband. But I would say this about my family background. I think that I was very fortunate. I had, as I say, they were working class parents. But my mother was a very strong character, very vivacious, very beautiful woman, very full of life, and always had a lot of ambition. So she was born the only daughter with seven. She was the seventh child, and she was a daughter. All the brothers were males. So she always says that she was spoilt rotten as a child and made to feel very special because everybody had wanted a girl. So she had grown up with a sense of she was the most special person in the world. And I think that she conveyed that to all of her children, really, that we're all special. And, I never thought about things like social status or where I fit in the world. My father was a very, I wouldn't describe him as a strong character, but he was a strong character. But he was a very quiet, stable man. Uh, his emotions were always secure, so not a lot of conversation from him, but whenever you did speak to him, you got good words, and he had a very good sense of humor, very dry sense of humor. So he saw the irony in life. So I think that I had a wonderful parental influence as a child, because I was surrounded by the knowledge that my both parents were hardworking. My mother was always doing jobs like selling Tupperware or one thing, whatever she did, she always worked very hard and did very well at it. But she also had the sense that there was no barriers. there was no barriers in life. You can achieve whatever you want to achieve. And so even at a very young age, before I was born, my mother had invested in property, which was quite unusual for, you know, the mining community. She'd had some disasters in her life early. She married at the age of 16, and by the age of 18 she was a widow, and then she married my father again. Her first husband died of some kind of radiation problem, which we suspect was, you know, nuclear testing in that time. But she inherited a very more modest amount of money, and as a result of that, she put it down as a deposit on a property, which was unusual at that day and age in that society. So even though I come from a working class background, we were pretty affluent within it, in the sense that, you know, my parents were hardworking. My mother always had an idea to invest and buy, not rent, and so we did quite well. But I loved the fact that I was very grounded as a child. Not spoiled, but never really denied anything that I needed. And always had the sense that if I had a problem, my parents were there for me. They would shout and tell us off if we knew what our boundaries were. We didn't have the sense that, you know, we were there to inform our parents. We were told what to do, and I was very comfortable. And so I think I grew up with having inherited, to some extent, I'd like to say, my father's stability and strength in not being too easily fazed by things, but also a bit of my mother in me to just think, oh, well, I'm here to do something, you know, with my life, and nothing's going to stand in my way. So that was my background. But I think as a child, I was really quite quiet. I remember being, I had a fairly good education. I went to a girls' grammar school. I certainly didn't stand out in any subject whatsoever. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I left school. I wanted to be a dental auxiliary nurse.
That's
Dental nurse.
interesting.
I have no idea why I chose that as the thing that I would carry on to learn about, because I was actually terrible at science. Maths and
Okay.
science were my weak subjects. I had no interest in them. I had little interest in academic things at all when I was at school, to be honest. I liked to play tennis. And I
Oh,
liked art, but I didn't think I was particularly good at art, but I liked it. And I liked, and the rest of it was just work to be done. I had no real, you know, it was a chore going to school and doing what you needed to do. And then I wanted to leave school and get a job. And I think when we had these career sessions where they say, what do you want to do when you leave school? And I had no idea what I wanted to do. But I remember getting a card and it said dental auxiliary nurse. So I thought, I'll do that.
oh.
And so for a few months, after leaving school with
So
so
which year was this?
it would probably be about 1976. I was 16. I didn't,
Okay.
the school that I went to, you took O levels. And, you know, I did okay with my O levels. If you were bright, you stayed on for another 2 years and did A levels. And then after that, you went to university. Now, I think for me, there was something in my programming of what was expected of me as I grew up that I never anticipated that I would stay on at school or go to university, because nobody in our family had gone to university. Or, you know, it was like, that's what the wealthier people did. So it was always with the expectation that when you're 16, you leave school, you hope to get good grades, leave school, get a job, and either get married and make your own life or stay at home and pay board. You know, you pay, start contributing to your parents. So that, I think, was just an expectation that I had, that I was at the age of 16, you know, it wasn't even thinkable to me or to the close circle of friends that I gathered around me, even though it was a good school, really. But still, I tended to associate with like-minded people, and we all couldn't wait to leave school, get a job, and start living life one way or another. So, yeah, by the time I was 18, I'd been what we call courting my boyfriend for at least 2 years. And so my parents were starting to say, isn't it time you were married now and having children? I remember my mother had married at 16, and she'd had a child with her first husband who died, and then she got pregnant and she married again to my father, and she had my elder sister and me. So by the time my mother was 21, 22, she'd got 3 children. And, you know, she'd come from a long line of people who had many children. So it was like, oh, Deborah, you're 18, 19 now. It's time you were married, surely. Having children. And yeah, so you kind of have that expectation, which is what I had. I got married at the age of 19, and by the age of 20, I got my first son. And then I had a child every 2 years until I had 4 children. So 2 boys and 2 girls. So I think my first part of being married and my youth was mainly about, you know, helping my husband, supporting my husband with his work, bringing up the children. I actually had, when I left, I left school to try and study to be a dental auxiliary nurse, which was the most ridiculous choice you could make because I had no aptitude for science. The one subject I did like at school was biology. I loved biology. I loved understanding how the body works, how the arteries work, how the blood flows through the system, and everything to do with nature. That was the one science that I loved. And so on the basis that I liked biology, after leaving school, I went to a science college to learn to be a dental nurse. But it was a long way away. I was 16. I was starting to live life and get interested. I didn't attend very often. And when I did attend, it was very demoralizing because I realized I couldn't understand anything and I couldn't catch up. So after 3 months, I dropped out. And, you know, it was my first failure when I dropped out and realized I'm not going to be able to do that kind of thing. But what I decided to do, and was very interested in setting up my own business. So I set up my own business on the local market stall, selling ladies' fashions. So I, for the first few months, I did it in partnership with my mother, who was, as I say, she was a Tupperware seller. And we did this together, but then she had other opportunities and I quite enjoyed doing it. So I just took the whole thing over, and she wasn't involved for it. But it was handy because, you know, she helped me at the beginning to help me go to Manchester, set up contracts with people. And so for the first 12 years of my professional life, I was working as a market trader, buying in and selling fashion clothing for women. And I did it at first I did it 4 days a week, but then as the children came along, I cut down the days, you know, cut it down to 3 days a week. And then there was a few years where it ended up just being weekends. But it got harder to keep a real grasp on that business as my children were getting older. And I started to realize that actually, I think I want to phase this out. And that coincided with the period where I started learning about astrology. So, which was only a pure interest, wasn't anything I ever did other than it quite interested me. But there was an overlap between when I was doing really diminishing the self-employment that I was doing, but also getting a developing interest in astrology. And so there was a time when I suddenly thought, I think I might make a change and I might go for being an astrologer. And I remember that was a very hard time in my life because it was a very difficult decision to make, you know, to make that jump. Because the way that the market system worked was the longer you have been doing it, the better stall position you get. So when you decide to not do it, you give up the history and the potential. But, you know, life conspired, and it was a very good thing that I did do it because within a few years, the whole market system had been changed in my local town. Pretty much all the market traders closed their business down within a few years. So I was lucky to get out of it when I did. Yeah,
Okay.
So
that sets up a nice foundation of your initial days. And when did astrology start? Because we don't see any spark of astrology until the moment you actually left what you were doing. So what you did after that, and how did astrology creep in?
So yeah, because so I never really had any interest in astrology at all, at all. Even though there were certain times in my life when I was quite interested in certain spiritual events, but not astrology. I always thought, because the only exposure I'd had to astrology really was what was in the newspapers, and I thought it was just rubbish. But when I was working as a market trader, and one of the good things about, or the interesting things about being a market trader, is that you have very good relationships around you with the other market traders. So you have your spot where you set up your store, and you have your little community around you of the other traders who have their regular spots, and you make a community. And when you're not busy, you're laughing and joking, having coffees with each other. And it was, so I had lots of friends and people in that market community. And the lady who stood opposite me she used to sell cards, birthday cards, Christmas cards. That was her store. But she was very interested, and she was very interested in mediumistic things and spiritualism. And I made a good friend of her. And I remember I was pregnant, I think, with my third child, my first daughter, and she was telling me about this new this class that was starting once a week to teach astrology. And she was asking me, it was on like a Wednesday or something, and she said, would you come with me? And I said, I don't think I'm really interested in that kind of thing. It was in the local Mansfield Arts Centre, so it was, it's just a few hours. She said, it's just that I'm going to struggle. I was thinking we could go together in your car. Now, this woman had been a good friend to me, and so I said, well, okay, well, I'll give it a go. And I went along, and so I started, really, because somebody else wanted me to, started attending some weekly classes, which was what got me into it, really. And the weekly classes were a lot about calculation, because a lot of it was about how to calculate your chart. So as a beginner, this is before computer days, you would learn about a planet, but then you would have to learn, well, what is the ascendant and how to calculate the ascendant and put that in the chart. So I found it very interesting. I wasn't convinced about the subject, but I found the experience of being in this class very interesting. And what I liked was the way that it made me think, not so much about the interest of what astrology does, but I found myself very interested in the concept of the philosophy of astrology, and the way that it impacted life, I suppose. So if you think about the fact that at this time I was pregnant with my third child, my work was mainly buying in and selling fashion items. I had no real I wasn't a reader. I wasn't somebody that really took to reading novels. I've never really been somebody that is an avid reader. So I didn't really, and even when I was at school, I just plodded along with the subjects at school. So I suppose this was the first time that something actually gave me a mental interest, where I thought, I'm quite interested to know more about that. It gives me something to study, that I'm actually studying from my own choice, a subject that I would choose to study, rather than when I was at school, you had to do this, you had to do that, and I had to learn this. So I found it quite interesting, because I was pregnant at the time, and I think I enjoyed the mental stimulation.
Okay.
Because life was a lot of just doing, and looking after the children and decorating, and and so finding time to sit and think about things that were a bit out of that domestic landscape was interesting for me. So as that course progressed, I found that I got a curiosity about astrology. I got curious. And one of the things that I noticed about that course was that as I listened to the teacher explain things, a lot of the other people that were around me would say, haven't got a clue what she's saying. I don't know how to do that, what she's saying. And I would say, I think I know what she's saying. I think you have to do this. So, you know, right from the start, I was like, as soon as I learned something, I was in the role of explaining it to somebody else in terms that I thought they would understand better. So I think there was a point very early on when I realized I could be a translator between the eyebrow stuff in astrology and taking it from academic sources, or, you know, at a level, and I could make it more accessible to the astrological student, not to the working, you know, the populace, but to the interested person like me, who, you know, needs it putting in layman terms. So I was able to bridge that world, which was quite interesting. So I remember I was tasked within that course at one stage. Somebody came in and they said, could you do me a horoscope? And the teacher asked me if I would do it for the following week, if I would prepare this stranger's horoscope. And I remember being horrified, thinking, I haven't got a clue. I haven't got a clue how to begin this. And eventually, when I did it, which was probably the night before, I remember getting the only book I had was Julia Parker and Derek Parker's Complete Astrologer, and maybe a couple of other books that I borrowed from the local library. And I just, you know, I just copied bits out and took this and put it together, and then I put it in my own way and put something down. And I remember this woman coming in after she'd had the report, and she was bursting, you know, like, oh, it was so good. It was so good. It was so accurate. And all the details and the things you've said, they were all true. And I was just, well, I wasn't even shocked, to be honest, Aswin, because I didn't believe it. I thought I'd just been very lucky.
Okay.
You know, like, oh, well, that's true. Well, that wasn't a disaster, but still, you know, just coincidence. But I remember the teacher at the end of it saying, you have an aptitude for this. You should do it. You should continue. Have you thought about studying it properly? And I was with my friend, whose name was Bobby, who was the one who wanted me to go. She was an older woman than me. She was a Leo. Okay.
Okay.
It's important you realize she was a Leo. And so Bobby stepped up and said, yes, well, I'm thinking of doing the faculty course. So, and the teacher said, have you thought about doing that, Deborah? And I was like, I'm not sure I could afford to do it, to be honest. So anyway, I took some information back and showed it to my husband. And quite honestly, I just thought, I don't have the money for this. You know, it's like this is serious money. And, you know, I'm bringing up children. And I remember talking to my husband about it, and he was saying, well, how much is it? And I was like, oh, it's maybe we could think about birthdays or Christmas. And I remember it was like when I said, well, Bobby's doing it. And he was like, oh, Bobby's doing it, is she? Yeah. He says, well, if Bobby's doing it, you can do it. So I started at the same time that Bobby, and we did the faculty course as a correspondence course. Now, I remember the name of my tutor. I won't say it because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but when you sent these exercises in, of course, they were always sent by the post, and they came back through the post. And I remember that I worked, you know, I'm somebody that I started to realize at that time in my life that if you give me a challenge, you know, I'm inspired by challenge. So to have these assignments to do, I really worked really hard. I really wanted my assignments to be very good. And I remember when, after sending the first one back, I got a very good. And I thought, okay, it was just a little mute. Very good. That's all I got. And when I saw Bobby on the market, she came running over. She was saying, did you get your assignment back? And I said, yes. She said, what did you get? I said, well, she said it was very good. I said, I got an excellent. So I said, oh, you got excellent. She says, yes, my tutor said my work was excellent. So I was, you know, a bit disheartened because I only got very good. So the next exercise, I worked, you know, I gave it everything. I gave it everything. I got a good. Bobby got an excellent. And so, you know, I remember on this certificate course for the faculty, almost killing myself to improve and improve and improve. And then eventually when I met my tutor, and then I met Bobby's tutor, I realized it was just down to personality style. You know, one of them was the type of tutor who would say, this is excellent. And my tutor was this is good enough. But that really motivated me. And I think that, you know, I did the faculty course, and then, well, I guess
And
I moved on to the faculty diploma. But I have to say that at that time, and I know that the faculty diploma and the coursework has changed a lot since then. But when would this be? This would be like the early 1990s. Or no,
this
no,
was modern
no.
astrology.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that after I did the faculty certificate course, this would probably be like mid to late 80s. Then I started to do the diploma course with the faculty. Again, it was correspondence sent through the post, because I live in near Nottinghamshire. I don't live in London. There was no courses or classes near to me. So the faculty correspondence course was the best way to learn at the time. But at that time, I realized that that really sucked all the interest out of me, because it went on and on and on. And it was so heavy with the psychological stuff that without any real depth. And so I realized that, you know, I was just being trained at a level where everything is what you want to make it to be. And I don't know, I just lost interest. And then I kind of dropped out of it, and it just seemed like a passing whim that I'd learned so much from. But then life took over, and it didn't keep me stimulated for beyond that. So the reason why I did continue was because when I had been doing it, I'd heard this discussion about this book called Christian Astrology by William Lilly, which I knew was a lot of money. So I remember saying to my husband, you know, when it's my birthday or Christmas, I would like, you know, this book. And then I think it was about 6 months later, and it was after I thought that I dropped out of astrology, that my husband presented me with Christian Astrology as a birthday present. And I remember thinking at the time, you've never had a good sense of timing, have you, Steve? Was last year. And having this book and thinking, not sure that I want this anymore. But then, you know, life moved on, and there was a time when I picked that book up, and so Christian Astrology got me interested in it again. So that was
Of
another story.
course. So that was the beginning of horary astrology as well, because uh, until then you were just doing modern astrology and you learned the calculation part, and then you,
Calculation.
yeah.
And I'm always grateful that I did do the faculty course and the modern perspective that it gave me, because I felt that it was very typical at that time that most of the people that actually went on and did things with traditional astrology had actually come from that kind of background. So we all had, you know, some semblance of modern astrological ideas and modern values and modern understanding of the importance of counselling, of psychology. So I do believe that it is important that every astrologer has that. I think that there is a concern nowadays that there's lots of people that are going straight in at a very young age to studying traditional astrology, and the focus seems to be all about the traditional technique, and the power of the traditional technique, but without having also balancing that with an understanding of the psychology, of the psyche, you know, the importance of counselling, the humanistic approach. So I have a concern nowadays that, you know, people are concentrating too much on technique and not having the fuller awareness of the importance of, you know, when you're doing a chart for somebody, to not only see what you see, but to know how to communicate that in a appropriate way. So I'm very grateful that I did do the modern training, but it kind of ran its course with me and got to a point where I thought, I don't feel I'm really learning more depth now. What I feel is I'm just getting a broader boundary of what I'm learning, but none of it gives me really the depth that I would want to have in order to feel confident or to be inspired about to continue this. So when I got the Christian Astrology, and I remember I had no interest in reading it for so long because I just felt like, busy with other things. And then there was one night when I started to read it and I could not understand, because it was, even though it's in English, it's in 17th century English, and it took some reading. And I remember getting really frustrated with the book and thinking, I have no idea what he's talking about. I kept picking this book up and putting it back and thinking, can't figure out a word of this. What is it? What is it? And I got myself in a state, I got really quite annoyed and quite angry at the fact that, this was a big book. It was an expensive book. I don't know what it's saying. So I kind of just really calmed myself down, and I thought, I am going to read this book, but I'm going to stop rushing it. So Lily, sit over there. You're in that chair. I'm going to read these words. I want you to speak them to me. And so I slowed down and started reading. And I guess it was just like this mental exercise that as I'm reading the words, I visualized Lily sitting and starting to speak them to me. And as I was struggling with the words, he'd be saying, just be patient. Just be patient. You'll come back and understand that in a moment. And so after a few pages, it was just the first few pages. I just needed to get into it. And then I kind of connected with the style of what was being said. And then I got interested. And then I just thought it was amazing, because here we've got a book, and suddenly, we're talking about astrological rulerships of everything around me, which is not what I'd been trained to do. So, he's talking about Saturn rules leather. I'm thinking, oh yeah, I never thought about that. And and the descriptions he's giving, and I'm looking around things in my daily life and thinking, what planet would rule you? What do you think? And everything just became an astrological theme. And that was the turning point, where suddenly it's not words on paper, and it's not abstract concepts that all depend on your power of your will and what you make of them. It was suddenly, the astrological essence is in everything around me. This cabinet is dark, it's wood. That's the Saturn theme. This is delicate, and so I really came to life again with reading Lily's explanation of astrology. And so there was a sticker in the book with Olivia Barclay saying that she taught the course, and that if you're interested in learning about it, to do that course. So I got in touch with Olivia and did the QHP. And so that was what got me started in Horry. And I do remember being told, but I didn't actually. Olivia got involved in some of my assignments and some of my work. And I met her a few times, and she spoke to me a few times, but I wasn't actually trained by Olivia. I got assigned to Sue Ward. And I was told that when I spoke to Olivia on the phone, she suggested that Sue Ward take me on, because she said she doesn't sound very bright, I'm afraid. She's got a bit of a northern accent. So they didn't have high hopes for me when I began. But I stuck with it. I finished the course, and that's what got me into horror.
So, and eventually you also moved to electional astrology. But before going to that, when did you actually start practicing astrology, and how were the initial days in terms of practice? Because you already mentioned that you have a very humble and down to earth background, so you had to earn your living by some means. So
Yes.
how were the early days as a practicing astrologer in Nottinghamshire? Because I always had and before this, I always thought you were from London, but uh, I came to know now that you're from Nottinghamshire. So it's a more slower and a reasonable city than London. which is extremely
Yes, and I
fast
don't live in
paced.
Nottingham. I live in a place called Mansfield, which is 14 miles from Nottingham. So it's
Okay.
it's not a mining town anymore, but it's very much, the roots of it, mining town. So it's not. I don't live in a city location, um, and I have never really had a big astrological practice within my own local area. When in my younger days, I would have some clients that would come and see me in my home, but actually, I never really built up an astrological consultancy within my home. Um, so how did I get into it? Well, as soon as you start studying astrology, you start doing a charts, don't you, for your friends, and then people want, and
Yeah.
then they want your presence. And I remember when I was doing natal astrology, thinking, I don't know how anybody ever makes a living out of this, because it would take me 3 weeks to interpret somebody's natal chart. I have so many things to take apart, and then I've got to put it back together. And so even when I was doing natal charts professionally, I have to say that to me, it was always a labour of love. Nobody could pay me the money that I would require to do a natal chart reading, to my satisfaction. It was never going to be a profitable thing. But the horror did seem to be very practical, because, there was something specific. I could do a consultation on that. And so I started doing horary consultations before I finished the QHP. And then there was a period where, I set myself up as a professional astrologer, had the business cards printed. And when I moved from working on the market, after completing the QHP, I started teaching the QHP immediately. For a while, I was teaching that course. And I knew, so the things that kicked me off were, first of all, I wrote to some magazines and offered my services to do articles for popular magazines. So, but I didn't want to do sun sign astrology, but I had these ideas that I could talk about. Next year, there is a Uranus-Neptune conjunction, and I could talk about that, and I could put it on a level that your readers can relate to it. And I can even tell them what it means for this sign, if you need me to, and there was another, about there's an eclipse. What do eclipses mean? Talk about eclipse folklore. So originally, I got quite well paid being a journalist, astrological writer for popular women's magazines. But they got more and more that they wanted me to continue doing sun sign features or whatever I wanted to talk about, because I would want to talk about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and they would want everything. But what does it mean for a Taurus, and what does it mean for a Gemini? And so it was slipping more and more towards sun sign astrology, which I have to say, I have great respect for sun sign astrologers. I think it's a real art and a craft, and I couldn't do it, not for all the money in the world, because, the brief that I got was, you have to say something for each sign. It has to be a minimum or a maximum. Let's say it's 50 words. It's all got to be different, but it can't be upsetting to anybody. It's always got to end with an up note. And so, I would set off for the first 3 signs, and I'd be full of, creative things. And then with that sign 4, oh, dear, how can I say this? Oh, dear. And by the time I get to sign 7 or 8, I'd be like, oh, when does it end? Why does there have to be 12 signs for the zodiac? So, as when I was well paid, but I hated it. I hated it. And I would be like, everything I did, I just didn't want to do this. I just knew that I did not want to be doing this kind of thing. And at the same time, what I was getting the passion about was, I wanted to create a magazine for astrologers that was interesting. So at this time, the AA journal was like a little A5 square journal, no pictures, no illustrations. You would get like a little, difficult to read chart, very tight wording. It's very academic as well. The articles were very academic. It was a hard read. I'm not an unintelligent person, but I would sit there, oh, God, and I wasn't seeing anything that was interesting, that was meaty, that was giving the information, and also including the images. And as I was interested in traditional books and what the historical astrologers were saying, I was very struck by the fact that astrology is an art as well as, a study. It's an art. And throughout the history, these beautiful illustrations, these people that have, astrology has inspired them to do this diagram and, this floods diagrams and the artistry that's been put into that. And so I wanted a magazine that would have interesting articles, practical astrology, demonstration of chart work, but also spacious and easy on the eye with pictures and being beautiful too. Now, I say that because as I look back on the early issues, I had no training to do any of that stuff, so it was very much, I was an amateur. So what was impressive to me then would not be impressive to me now, but I do remember, just getting a big A4 magazine that you can read with a cup of coffee, rather than having to, get your glasses out and make it a job. So there was a bit of a discussion. We had a meeting with myself and several traditional astrologers. I remember Bernard Eccles came, Maurice McCann, David Plant. There was a collection. We all met somewhere in the middle of England with a view to let's start up a magazine about traditional astrology. And as we had this discussion, most people ended up saying, this sounds like a really good idea for you to do, Deborah. And like, yeah, we'll give you some articles, we'll set things up. And, it was like, yes. So we think you should do it, Deborah. It was like, I wanted to be a part of something, but, it was clear that if this was going to happen, I had to make it happen. But David Plant, who was the assistant editor of the Traditional magazine, he came on from the start and he was wonderful. He really, the Traditional Astrology magazine would not have happened without David Plant, who was regularly there, supporting, and Dylan Warren Davis, who contributed many regular articles on herbalism and also gave me, feedback, because at this stage, so this is getting towards the early 1990s, I remember I bought a computer in to do this, and the computer, maybe it was the one I had a few years before, it had a hard drive of 30 megabytes, right? And I remember saying to the chap, the salesman, what happens if I fill up my 30 megabytes? And he was hysterics, laughing to his, to the person who was with her, like, you'd have to write 3,000 books before you could fill up that hard drive. So this is just around the time that tabletop design software was coming out, Amy Pro, so I remember I had to get a new computer with 130 megabytes, which I was told would last me forever. So Amy Pro, the desktop publishing software, came out, and I sat down and learned how to do that, and hooked up with a local printer, and they were originally photocopied and stapled. And I remember Dylan Warren Davis saying to me, it's all very well, but Deborah, when you have this title, really that should be on that side of the paper, not that side. And I remember saying, should it? I didn't know. Didn't know. So they were very gentle with the feedback, and it was a process of doing it and learning, and so my income came down as an astrologer from the very well paid contracts I was getting as a magazine article writer, to setting up the Traditional Astrologer, where the income went into minus. So I was also building up personal consultations, and they were bringing an income. But I think the Traditional Astrologer was never an income earner. It was more of a project you support. It was, it was a thrill to do it, and I always looked on it as, well, it gets my name out there. And as a result of the Traditional Astrology, which slowly, very slowly, built up, a small collective group of subscribers, I don't think it ever got to more than 500 subscribers at any one time, but within the small nucleus of astrologers that it was aimed for, that was quite an achievement for me. And of course, then as a result, because I was writing about horror, I would get a lot of horror consultations come to me and requests. And so in that period, I was working very actively on horror consultations, but they were usually over the phone consultations, or there would be events where I would go and attend events, and I would attend conferences, and I would do, back-to-back horror consultations. So I was busy with horror consultations, and I did okay.
Okay.
Nobody would really want to emulate my financial income, but it was good enough.
Uh, okay. So, I mean, you had a reasonably uh, good early days of practice, because you already did the course, and after that you also completed your QHP, and you had good contact, and uh, you know
Yes, which just
people
got out
connect.
through word of mouth, really,
Yeah.
And I remember I was also tutoring. So, with a combination of the tutoring, the consultations, which once you do start building up your clientele, I would got, quite a lot of clients that knew of other clients and had different circles of clients. So I was always busy at that time with consultations, and that was it was, I only considered it part-time work, and
Okay.
also I considered it my hobby more than anything else. I wasn't really looking to, I got 4 young children. I'd realized that I can't work more than so many hours a week anyway, because my main job was, I had to fit this in
Parenting.
with what worked. So I was happy enough with what I was doing.
So I just wanted to ask one thing before we move on. Like, you were publishing Traditional Astrologer magazine, but was this also simultaneously you were part of the editing group, or working as an editor in other international magazines?
No, because I gave that up at the time. When I was doing
Okay.
the commercial, the popular media magazines,
Okay.
it was with the decision that I can carry on doing this and earning good money, but I hate it. Or I gave it up and to start my own magazine, which I loved doing, but I knew that I wasn't going to replicate the income with it, but I'd rather be struggling a little bit and doing what I love. That's the lesson that I learned. I mean, they could have said, we'll pay you 10 times more if you carry on doing it, and I would not have been able to do it. It just, at a creative level, it destroyed me. And that's why I have great respect for somewhat sun sign astrologers, because I do believe that some of them are a place where the public can turn, and they can just see a little message, and it gives them a message of hope. And I do believe that there's connections in life, that sometimes when we're searching for a meaning or we're searching for a message, life has a way of getting it to us, and sometimes astrologers can be that conduit.
Okay.
And some of them use that opportunity very well to put words of wisdom out to the public, and the fact that they do this regularly and they do it, they have my respect. Not all of them, because some of them I don't think do us any favors, but the ones that do it well, I have a lot of respect for them, and I know they do things that I could not do. I
Okay.
could not do that kind of work.
So by now you're an established horror astrologer, and you're a writer. And
Yeah, we should probably say that what I was doing as well at the same time was I'd set up a Seller Publications. And this is quite instrumental, actually, as to what developed me as a more well-known astrologer. So a Seller Publications was, well, actually, I can show you a copy of my early book, or, oh, here we go. So when I was studying, the only place where you could buy the traditional texts at that time was a guy called John Ballantrae, or Ballantrae, based in Canada. And there were books that I wanted, such as Firmicus, the Mattheses,
Oh,
and yeah, I'm going to show you what I produced as a seller. But he sold them as facsimile copies. He had a long list of not just astrology books, but all kinds of historical texts on all kinds of occult and esoteric subjects that were reproduced as photocopies and then spiral bound, and you could buy them in. And they were not cheap, but very often the postage to get them
yeah.
shipped from Canada was, as you know, a good proportion of the cost of buying the books. And there was a whole list of them. You know, I ordered a couple of books from him. He was a very nice chap, but they were expensive for me. You know, I mean, I didn't have the money to spare, so it was an investment. And I realised I wanted all of the ones they had on astrology, not just one or two. I wanted them all. So I wrote to him, or maybe I wrote to him and then we spoke on the phone, and you know, I made him this suggestion that could I be a distributor for you, or you know, help in some way, because I thought that then gets me a copy of the book, so that I can, you know, I can get the book and read it.
Of course.
And he and I said, but he said, well, it's not really what they're just photocopies. Why don't you do it over there? And I said, but I don't want to hurt your supply, you know. And he said, I don't own the copyright on these books, the facsimiles. He says, and to be honest, you know, I've got enough orders for what I want to do. And if you order the books from me and you want to recreate them and sell them yourself over in Europe, you have my full blessing. Within a few years, I think his business closed down, or, you know, there was lots of problems with people getting orders from, I don't know the reasons why, but I know a lot of people had problems, you know, sending in orders and they weren't fulfilled. So for one reason or another, you know, he was very happy to say, if you buy the books from me, then you can reproduce them and sell them on. I don't own the facsimiles, you know, they're out of copyright. So I decided that if I bought a copy of every book that I wanted, and then I made a list, being able to reproduce it, photocopy it, bind it on and send them on, that would justify the expense I wanted to go to buy the books I wanted.
Sure.
And I thought maybe there's a few people that, you know, if I buy a book and I sell 4 copies of it, it's worth me doing what I need to do. So I put a little photocopied flyer together of all the books that were available or could be available if I ordered them from John. And I put it in the Traditional Astrologer, and to my amazement, you know, the orders for the books were overwhelming. I mean, I remember the first one coming back, and somebody, there was like a list of 60 books or something like that, and one woman had just ticked every single book on the flyer, and like she wanted every one. And I was like, I have to take these books apart and create them and make them work. So we set up a Seller Publications, and it had a good trade. So it would like, this would be Firmicus. I mean, there was a lot of extra work, because although John only did the facsimiles, like with the Firmicus, there was David McCann, who also wrote regular articles for the magazine. You know, he took the text and annotated it, and then I bought in this binding machine, and we were like gold foil covers, but they were still like individually produced. And because of the need for the investment, because of the equipment, again, it wasn't a money earner, but it was good enough that with the magazine, with the publishing company, and with my consultations, I eventually had 2 members of staff helping me keeping everything going. And, you know, I mean, they were just like apprentices, or so it was a day job for them. And so it turned into quite a big thing. So I was like, the Seller Publications was getting the books out there. The magazine was going out, and that was building up its subscription base. And then there was a lady called Anne Elliot, who lived in Australia, and she came over to Britain and she asked if she could come and see me. And she did, and she asked about the possibility of her setting up a publishing company called Spiker Publications and doing the same thing with the Estella Publications. And I said the same thing. These books are out of, you know, unless it was something that we'd worked on individually, these are facsimiles. I don't own them. John gave them to me. You want to do that in Australia? Makes sense. Why should people be paying the airfare for Australia? And she also said, I'd like to set up a teaching venue for you to come over to Australia and teach horary as a week-long, as a like a 5-day course. I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 days. And teach it, because although there was a few individuals in Australia that knew something about horary, most astrologers did not. It was not very well known at that time within the Australian astrological community. And she said, if I set a venue up and pay for your airfare and pay you money to come and teach this course, will you do it? And I said yes, because I thought, I'm never going to go to Australia.
Of course.
You know,
I mean, to teach in some other continent and to be able to spread a branch of astrology altogether, I think it's a great thing
of
to do.
course. I was a part-time hobbyist with 4 young children, you know, struggling to pay the mortgage, and somebody saying, come to Australia, we'll pay your airfare, we'll put you up, you can teach, will you do it? So I was, yes, no problem. And I remember, and at that time, you know, I really
so what year was this? Was this in 90s or 2000?
1996
okay.
was the year that I went over and delivered a horary course as an attendance event. And I remember, you know, thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? I mean, as far as I was aware, nobody had taught horary in this kind of format before. It had only ever been taught by correspondence or by, you know, people going to weekly classes at the lodge or something like that. And all I had was a big folder full of charts that were on acetates, because we're talking about the era of fax machines, of overhead projectors, and of charts on transparencies. You know, we're not talking PowerPoint days yet or anything like that. And I remember flying over with this sense of trepidation of, oh my goodness, this is going to be terrible. I'm going to die. You know, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even have a good speaking voice. They're going to think they're going to get a really great presenter and I'm going to disappoint them on every level. And this will probably end my astrological career. But I also thought, but still, they can't throw me out of the country. I get to see Australia. And as I retire into my bringing up the children, I'll always be able to say, I was flown to Australia and I taught a course there. So with the total belief that it was going to be just terrible and that there would be no follow-up because I would reveal myself for the inept amateur that I was, you know, I still went along because I thought the opportunity is too good for me not to take it up, even though I don't feel really ready to do what you're expecting of me. And so that first delivery of the course was really just me being in a room with like-minded astrologers and, you know, talking about horary, putting up charts, discussing, picking up where they're not getting it right. And that was when I realized that, yes, I do have a real aptitude in teaching this because I can communicate the principles. And I would, every day I would go so nervous thinking, I don't know what I'm going to say today. And I'm sure I don't know how to say it. But the minute I would kick off and the conversation would start, you couldn't shut me up. I had so much I wanted to say, so much to talk about. I really was so interested in every single member of the group understanding and getting them to have the confidence to stand up. Because one thing I was very aware of was that so many people at that time had studied horary and done the QHP course, but most people dropped out the course, by far. Few people finished that course. In fact, I think Olivia once told me that most people who paid in full for the course never sent in more than session 1. So they just dropped out. And then most people dropped out before the end of the course. Very few people actually completed it. And I was aware that most of the people that did complete it did not know how to judge a horary. Now, what they could do is they could analyse how Lily had judged a horary, and they could give you page references in Christian astrology for where Lily said this and Lily said that. And they could, they could do a second review of what somebody else was doing and say, oh, you haven't considered this consideration for judgment. But they couldn't deal with a client in front of them to deal with, to convey the information, to make a judgment. So theoretically, they knew it all and they could write about it and sound very clever. But, some of them would not dare to see a client and did not have the confidence to translate that into a modern day working skill. So I was always very keen that, it's all right learning the theory of this stuff, but that's only part of the training. Really, the training is about how to bring this into your heart, how to make that symbolism your own, how to speak the language, and how to have the confidence to know when you're in a consultation, this is what you need to understand, and this is what you need to relate, because they can be two different things, Aswin. There is what you see, and then there is the detail of how you communicate that and how you push that on for the benefit of your client and what to hold in reserve. And a lot of it is about, daring to take the risk, because I think that is a block for many. They can learn the theory, but then to dare to take the risk and put their views out, knowing that this could go wrong, is a block for many astrologers. So a lot of my course was about making these members of audience get up and speak what they were seeing and opening their mouths. And a lot of them were very shy because they would tell me, but they didn't want to tell the group. So if I knew they didn't want to tell the group, I made them tell the group. If you're going to get it wrong here, when no clients are harmed in the process. This is your training. So I realized then that I had a natural aptitude to teaching horary, that I wanted to teach horary, and that I wanted to do it differently from how it had been taught by other people, that there were concepts that I wanted to build in. There were some different ideas on some of the things that had been taught before. There were some points that I didn't feel most people were understanding correctly, points like reception, combustion. So that's, the three things together, I would never have got that invitation had it not been for the Acela publications.
Okay.
And so the Traditional Astrologer, Acela publications, and teaching my own version of a course that developed, it's now 25 years and I'm still topping and tailing it. And then I guess the other stream of this was that during that process, that also brought me into web development and the SkyScript site that, was another simultaneous thing.
So before going to SkyScript, I just wanted to ask you, because this discussion is organically taking me to the School of Traditional Astrology. Did the tour to Australia and the confidence that you gained in yourself to be a perfect horary teacher lead you, or did it really set up a solid platform for you to be a teacher for the rest of your life as an
Yeah,
astrologer?
this has definitely evolved, but the thing is that I got such good feedback at the course that even before I left the country, we were setting up the next event and the next return. So I had several years, I think between 1996 and 1999 or the year 2000, when I was going back over to Australia. The last time I went over, I did, I can't remember, I might get it wrong, it was either 3 or 5 courses. I was doing them in Tasmania, in Perth, in Adelaide. I was flying interstate, I was away from her. There was a lot. Yeah, I probably did 5 courses in 1 year, but in 2 trips. But and then there was, weekend events and other events going on. So I was a much bigger name in Australia than back here in Britain, where, you know, I always say, your light shines brighter from afar. You know, back here in Britain at this time, I was the person to think of inviting to a conference if somebody else fails to turn up. You know,
Oh,
ask Deb, she'll come and she'll stand in. Whereas in Australia, you know, I was the bigger name. And I think that is often the case, that your own locality sees you as familiar. Whereas when you travel and you're an international speaker, they pull out the stops in this, your reputation that they perceive precedes you. So it was very good. It went very well. And every time that I developed the course, I mean, originally there was no notes on the course. It was just me talking with PowerPoints, maybe one or two articles I'd taken along. But I would always ask for feedback, critical feedback, which is still very much a part of what the STA does. You know, we're so keen as a school to always say, we want to know your critical feedback, because we're keen, it's the most valuable thing. And the first feedback I got was, it would be really good to be able to keep copies of the charts, because I only had them on transparencies and talked about them, and they didn't have copies. So I remember the next time I went over, I was thinking, awkward students needing me to give them copies of the charts, that's going to be extra work. And then I remember, you know, one after, so, you know, they get copies of the charts, and then on the next run, you know, somebody would say, it'd be really good if you could put some of those points into bullet points, so that, you know, we'd have those bullet points to take home. So I started doing bullet points for some of the things, and they started to organically grow from this mishmash of whatever I'm thinking to talk about in a, you know, in whatever setting we're in, to a more organized collection of, this will be this day's theme, this will be this day's theme, and here's a few bullet points. And so, you know, but still, it was for many years, it was, that course was only really delivered as an intensive event, residential event, where I really sucked the living blood out of everybody and said, first I'm going to break you, then I'm going to make you, but when you leave here, you will be doing horror. And it was, you know, it was really intensive, until, you know, more recently, when it's been turned into an online event, and then it's all been changed and developed. And now I think there's like 400 pages of text. There's I can't remember, get the details wrong, but we're talking about hundreds of chart examples, you know, so much reading. And it all started with just this one invitation, but it's been, you know, and now there's online assessments, there's questions. So it's never stopped being developed since. And I think that the state it's in now is a really excellent, challenging, you know, it's more challenging. There's so much material to have to learn, but it's a very engaging course, and I take great pride about the fact that, you know, it's very much the fashion to deliver online courses and online seminars now, but we have really invested in making a course that engages the student. It's online, it's not distant, you know, so we have it set up with forums, we answer, you know, there's live deliveries of presentations. The students are challenged to answer and engage with the material. And for a long time, I was reluctant to let this course go on as an online course, because I was so insistent that it's about being in the room with the astrologer. It's about being present. It's a mentorship program. It's not something that you just deliver over distance. And I think we've managed to do that with the course that we're, the STA practitioners level course. So I think it's now, it's got a lot of reading, it's got a lot of exercise, it's got a lot of examples, but it's still got that same mentorship feel of the tutors, you know, being willing to explain. And if I can just, you know, just to end this point, that I think that one of the important things about it is, what we offer is a 20-week course, and I now realize it takes 20 weeks for an astrologer to move through this process, because when they start it, they think it's all about learning the techniques, significators, applying, and, you know, we go into a lot of detail about the philosophy of the techniques and what the techniques mean in more detail, but still there is a point in the journey of a student completing this program that they start to realize that you can learn the theory forevermore, but there has to be a mind shift, and there has to be a heart change, and there has to be something within you that owns this system, so that by the time they complete the program, they've actually done a lot more than just learn about the astrological theory or the techniques. They processed it and they've owned it. And I think that that is something that happens to every good astrologer at some stage, that it becomes more than the words or what you've learned. It's become something that's become a part of you, that's something that you now, this is my astrology. Now I own this astrology, and now I take the responsibility, and my astrology is unique, and I value your astrology and I value your astrology. But when I practice astrology, this is coming through me, from me, and I am at one with it. So, you know, I think that the program is more about just the testing, just the learning, but also the realization that this subject that we commercially trade, that we talk about, that we deal with online, it's an occult subject. It's a sacred subject. It's spiritual. You know, it's got so many practical applications, but it touches the very deepest core of the spirituality of life. And so there is a level where you cannot just churn this out and churn this out and churn this out unless you are diminishing something about the beauty of it. And so there is a part of the training that we try and do as a school is to realize, you know, there's a lot going on here, but what we're not trying to do is keep giving you more and more. We're trying to bring you closer, because when you connect with astrology and it connects with you, it is awe-inspiring. It changes everything. And I worry sometimes, you know, when I said I have this concern that there's a lot of courses that are bringing in very young people and teaching them techniques, and within 6 months they're out there working, you know, advertising on Twitter and being a professional astrologer. And I think, but where was the digestion? Where was the processing? Where was the collection of wisdom? Nothing is gained without a sacrifice. You know, most of us, I think you'll agree, we want to do this so much. We have sacrificed things to learn.
Sure.
And we sacrifice to pass it on to the right people, because that is part of what we do.
Sure. I mean, passing on the mantle is extremely important. So let's move to SkyScript, which is almost like a second home to a lot of people. So, I mean, so how did SkyScript begin? Did you?
I always feel a little nervy about SkyScript. It's like my forgotten child. And I don't like reminding of, because, you know, for so many years I haven't been able to do anything with it, and it's more, you know, it's only been remaining in existence because Paul, I can't even say his surname, so I won't, you know, but he's moderating the forum and he's keeping things going. But we have a plan, there of us, that one day soon we will be getting back to it, and we will run, you know, we will renovate it and uplift it, because it's looking a bit dusty now, I have to say. It was very much of the 90s when it was created. But the background to that is that, well, because of the traditional astrologer, and at this time, this is when the internet was invented. It was new. You know, the internet wasn't invented till 1993, and that was the same year that the traditional astrologer started. So within a few years, people were talking about things like email. And I remember thinking, what is this email thing that everybody keeps talking about? You know, what is it? How does it work? I remember having to get a modem in my house and getting hooked up to email, and that was a challenge, you know, just like getting email to work. And then there was the web, and originally it was all, you know, Netscape with grey screens and then flashing images, because you could put moving GIFs on. And so I was part of that generation that learned how to do a web page and put flashing moving images on, just because you could. Just because for the first time you could do some, you know, design work, and you could have a line that twinkled. So originally, you know, to begin with, the web was full of twinkling, sparkling, moving GIFs and animated GIFs, until a few years later you realize that, okay, we've done that now, we don't really need those, we'll start taking them out. But I was part of the early generation, you know, this early generation of like figuring it out, how to build a website. As was, you know, David Plant, who was doing stuff. So there was a collection of astrologers at that time that suddenly, here is the web, here is a universal resource, this library in the sky. You know, I'm trading in facsimile out of work texts, And the reason I'm doing that is because as a student, you know, I didn't go to university. I didn't have a university library to get access. All the books I wanted to research were all in university libraries. And at a ridiculous cost of like £200 for that book. I only want to read the damn thing, you know. And so I would have to go to my local library and I would have to fill a ticket out, and it would take 6 to 8 weeks for them to get the books into my local library. And then because it was a university book, I would have to stay in that library and read it there. Or so I would photocopy as much as I could to take it home, you know, to have copies to take home. But that was, you know, my experience of getting access to the books that I wanted to read. So the idea that we could do stuff, we could put it on the web, we could share it, and then other students can get access, and we could all do this together. It was just wonderful. And everybody that I was involved with originally was of the same mind, you know, was like the web, there was no thought of the web being a commercial vehicle. The web was the library in space, that we're all putting stuff into the library and for other students, and we will all gain because every time somebody puts in this stuff there. So the early websites of the 1990s through to, you know, until the 2000, they were nearly all, you know, little homegrown, no adverts on them, just hobbyists putting material in there. But a lot of them would, you know, get forgotten or left, and then as people left and didn't have the interest anymore, they might put adverts on them. But my background in this was I started off designing a site called Astrology World, and it was just, I remember it had this beautiful gold rotating moon, which was an animated gift, and I thought it was beautiful because I had this galaxy behind it, and it was just a place where I parked articles that were in the magazine or not in the magazine, and I would just ring up astrologers and say, could you give me an article for, I'm doing this website, Astrology World, and I just wanted to put a library, you know, for astrological articles. And if I can be honest, I mean, I might get some people hating me if I say this, but it is the truth. So here we go. At that time, there was a lot of American websites, and their opening page would be the best astrology site, the world's most wonderful, most full. And I just thought it was very tacky. So I would lead, you know, I'd call somebody up, maybe it was Maurice McCann, Dennis Elwell, Liz Green, anybody, and say, so I'm doing this website and I'd love to have one of your articles, but it's very low key. I'm not going to say, I'm like, you know, like it's the best. And I remember having a conversation with Liz Green and saying, because, you know, Liz, you know how you get all those American sites and all the Americans are saying the best website, the best website. I want this to be very British and understated, not leading with big adverts, but just good, full of good material. And I remember Liz Green saying to me, oh, I so agree. Yes, you do know I'm American, don't you, Deborah? And I'm like, catching my words. Oh, yeah, but you're. Yeah. She says, but I understand exactly what you're saying, and don't worry, I've got a good article. And then my next call would be to Maurice McCann. Maurice, I want to do it. I want it to be British. I want it to look these American. I want it to be British. And I hate the British, Deborah. I'm Irish. Oh, you're Irish, but that's British, isn't it? It was like, are you joking me? I didn't know. I was only young. I thought Ireland, surely it's part. Yeah, I know it's Ireland. I know you've got your own country. Is that part of Great Britain? So I'd have a Maurice ranting down the phone about no, how he's not British, he's Irish, but still, he's got an article. And you know, Dennis, and I would just ring people up and have conversations, and they were just happy to do it because of the, you know, just support the theme. So it got a collection of really good articles. And I remember one day, but it was like just a hobby. And then one day Microsoft emailed me and said, we would like to feature this as the site of the day. And I think it was only because it also had like a little sun sign column that I did. And it was the beautiful rotating moon. It just looked good. And they were saying, could your server support it? And I didn't even know much about who Microsoft were. And I just thought, I've got a counter, you know, it's like, I remember when Microsoft made it the site of the day, and when they do that, they actually make it the site of the day for a week. And it had
Oh,
this little rotating counter that clocked up every time somebody went on it. And when Microsoft made it the site of the day, this counter was spinning. The numbers could not keep up, you know. And I was on, like, the guy who was hosting it. I was saying, can you give it some more server space? Because it was just constantly crashing, because the amount of traffic that site got. And it was a hugely, Astrology World was hugely popular. It was like, but there was no adverts on it. There was nothing being sold on it. So to me, it was not a big thing whether it was popular or not, because it was just a resource. And so that was my early foray into web design, and just, you know, sitting up at night till 2 o'clock in the morning, trying to figure out, if I put a table, how do I get a table on? You know, and then if I learned I could do something else, that the next page would have that feature on it, because that was what I just learned. You know, so it was very much about me having a place to just experiment and do things and share astrology.
sure.
Now, so what happened was, around 1999 or the year 2000, though, I dropped out. I resigned as an astrologer, because
Oh,
when I was over in Australia, they discovered that I had a brain tumor. It was like, we won't even go into
oh,
that story because it's a long story, as we and, you know, like, full of curious things. But for one reason or another, I realized I had a brain tumor, and I had to have an operation. It was a slow growing brain tumor, but I had to have an operation. And so at that time, I really felt that my life was, wow, it was just too much, you know, as well as the family, you know, the home, the children growing. There was the magazine, there was the books, there was the website taking off, there was the clients, there was the tutoring. And I remember feeling at the time like I got plates spinning everywhere. And, you know, all I'm doing now is just keeping the plates spinning. I can't, you know, I remember at one time thinking, I can't keep those plates spinning. I'm just gonna crash the lot. Just crash the lot, because there's the only way that I'm going to make time for myself. And I don't know whether I'm even going to survive this operation, but I know that within the next 6 months, I have to change my life, and I have to set things up, and I have to take care of things. And then I have to, you know, take some time out for myself. So at that time, I decided, I think I got to issue 19 of the Traditional Astrologer. It was always intended to have 20, but I never made the last one. I got to issue 19, and, you know, that was all that there was in me. So I always think one day in the future, I might just pop up and do Traditional Astrologer issue 20 as a special event. Never anymore, just to finish it. But I closed down the Traditional Astrologer. A chap called Peter Hill bought out Acela Publications at a very, very modest amount. And then he didn't really do anything with it, so that just effectively closed down. Astrology World just hung around on the web until its domain name came up and got took by somebody else, and so that eventually disappeared. And yeah, and I dropped out, so it all ended. And when I did get well after my
what year was
operation,
this when you were diagnosed and then you decided to leave all this?
I'm a little vague because I can't remember if I was diagnosed in 1999 and the operation was in 2000 or something. I'd have to check my notes, but it was
No problem.
around the millennium. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
in
okay.
99 I was diagnosed, and then I was booked in for an operation, and then the operation was cancelled, and because they found out that I had a blood disorder, so they couldn't go ahead, and it was like, oh, it was all weird stuff that went on. I was never worried. I was never worried about the situation. It came as a big shock. But actually, the big shock of when I found out about this was the realization of how much, wow, I want to live, and there's things I want to do afterwards, and the great creative urge I had of, I want to spend time with my children. And, you know, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters to me is I never finished doing up my house. And I could have written 40 magazines, but nobody's going to care about that. I realized then the last thing that would be on my mind when I died would be, did I bring my kids up right? Did I get my house done? And everything that I wrote as an astrologer will be there for, it will not matter to me. and I still haven't finished my house. But the creative urge I got was like, oh, there's so much I want to do. I want to do the garden. I want to do this bedroom. My goodness, we said 9 months ago we're going to do that. And so, you know, all my priorities changed. And when I had the operation and eventually recovered, to get back, I really just wanted to do something completely different. You know, to not work from home, because I'd been running a business in my home with 2 members of staff. I like the idea of going out and doing something in business. So I applied for the first advert that I saw for a job. It said it had a week's training in Wales. So I thought, that sounds good. I get to see Wales. So I trained up on this job, and I went for a job, and it was like magazine. It was selling magazine adverts, basically, for a local company. But I remember, it was a very weird story. I don't want to go too far because it could take a long time. But basically, in a nutshell, I ended up going in to see the owner of the company. I mean, it was the biggest employer in the local area, and it was a massive, very, very big multi-million-pound company. And I remember waltzing in to the office of the man who owned it to let him know that I'm not sure you realise this, but your website's not very good. I could do a better one. And I remember him saying to me, "Who are you? Where do you sit? What's your job? Why are you not doing it? Yeah, why are you not selling adverts?" And you know, he had this poster behind him, on the wall behind him, that like their values, and it said, if you have a good idea, never hesitate to go to. So, oh, sorry, oh, here I am looking at that and thinking they actually count for something, when I should have realized it's just wall art, you know. And he was taken aback, and I was so embarrassed. I decided that you know, he more or less sent me out the office as if to say, who are you? Get, you know, I don't need web advice from you. I mean, this company actually had its own web design, about web design firm. And he sent me out, and I remember thinking, I'm just going to leave today. I'm not coming back because I'm too embarrassed. But I got a message from him saying that he would see me again on Monday, and if I had any ideas, to put them down on paper and to bring them to him on the Monday. So as one, I was so angry, so annoyed at being embarrassed and humiliated, that I worked without sleep for about 4 days as I put this business proposal together and mocked up a website and, you know, created a website for them. And what I really expected was I was going to go in and I was going to say, see that? See how good it is? That's what you could have had if you had not been rude to me. Then I never actually got to see him. It got passed on. And I remember for a few days, you know, I was in abeyance, and I just kept thinking, I only wanted, because I just want to leave. I just want to leave this place. And I expected him to have me in, and I was going to say to him, yeah, well, I'm not interested because you were so rude and I don't need this. But he actually called me in several days later, and he got a team in there. And as he introduced me, and he said to everybody, now then, everybody, Deborah's the woman I told you all about. Deborah just marched into my office without a care in the world, telling me I should do this and telling me I should do that. I need more of that in my company. And he said, I want to move you onto we are actually setting up a whole development team for our website. You don't know about this. And I want to have you involved. And now I was just no skills at all. But these were all serious coders, serious programmers. So, you know, and he had me in as the content manager. So I would design, but I would also but the user experience. No, the user's not seeing that. I don't care. You know, the user doesn't see that. So I was very much a part of their team, and they trained me up to do certain things. And then there was a new manager, and the new manager I did not get on with. He had issues he didn't want me, he knew that I'd had a brain tumor in the past, and he didn't want me working in front of a computer. So for one reason or another, I said, I think I'm ready to move on. So I came out of that job, and sorry, this is such a long story. You'll have to edit it all out. It's far too long. But
It's okay.
basically, I was on garden leave at home, And I was still playing around with learning new things that I'd started learning in this company. And I wanted to learn how to do a forum facility. So I set something up and I called it SkyScript because I just, it was just the site I was playing with. I wasn't going to do, it wasn't going to be open, it wasn't going to be published, wasn't going to do anything, but it was just something, I've got this little domain name and I started creating a forum just so I could do the code basically, see if I could do it. And I remember going in one day, probably, like third day of playing on it and expecting to take the whole thing down. And Tom Callanan from America had joined it and put a post in there. This was 2003 and said, "Hey, Deb, it's great to see you back. Well, it's great to see this forum." And I was horrified. I wanted to say, "Tom, get off my forum. It's not, it's not real." And I was just, it's like, oh my goodness. And then, a few other people joined in and it was like, oh my goodness, people are using this forum, but I really did not intend to do anything other than play around with design. So for a while, I was just like putting a word in here and there, but I think I'm not committed, I'm not an astrologer, I'm out of astrology. And within a few months, it started to get back. And then I started to, respond to forum posts just because I was but still thinking, no, I'm not an astrologer, but I'll just answer that. And then one way or another, the forum took off and the forum discussion would get me in. And before you knew it, I was back in astrology and then I was doing consultations and then I was teaching again. So SkyScript got me back into astrology. And then as I got to invest in that became the main thing. That was my creative, like at night when the kids were in bed, I'd do another page on SkyScript, just put another article up, just see what there is. And just, it was just, and other people loved it, they contributed to it. And that's really all SkyScript ever was. It was just a hobby. So it's good that it's got the interest and the awareness that it has. I do know that at one stage I was getting a lot of complaints from people. At one stage somebody was emailing me regularly saying that somebody on your team needs sacking. This hasn't been updated and this hasn't been updated. And I was thinking, they think there's a team here. It's just me doing it on Wednesday nights when the kids are in bed. Have I got to sack myself? So SkyScript. And then really there was a time when I think it was about 2016 when I had my second health issue and I needed another big operation. And around that time I realized that had got too big. So at that stage we agreed for Paul to maintain it, but there is a hope that in a year or two there'll be a big reinvestment of creative energy into SkyScript to do more with the design. The one thing that, I could have sold it so many times and sold SkyScript to people that wanted to pay it, but I knew that it would be so commercialized and drowned out with adverts. And the one thing that I'm insistent on is it will stand or it will fall over and collapse, but it will be, there's one or two discrete astrology themed adverts, but it is not going to be turned into what you see a lot of on the web, which is constant driving, commercializing, looking for things, grabbing people's data. It's just a very old-fashioned, dusty website, which gives old-fashioned traditional astrology, I guess.
It's a knowledge bank. So despite its classical look of the 90s, I don't think it has anything to be changed. So your book, which turns out to be one of the primary and probably one of the very few books in the houses. So how did it lead to the book? And it has the foreword by Robert Hand. So if you can take through that story, I think it will be fascinating.
Yeah, well, when I started up the Traditional Astrologer, I think even before then, I was starting to research the history of astrology. In fact, I'd been tasked by a friend to write a book on the history of astrology. You've got 6 months to do it. And I was saying, but I know nothing about the history of astrology. Oh, don't worry, you've got 6 months. We only need something like Nicholas Campion's Introduction to the History of Astrology, which was just a little pamphlet. So I said, well, I'll see what I can do. And so that started my lifelong rabbit hole of exploring the history of astrology. And for 10 years, I just researched, and I was so interested in ancient astrology, Egyptian astrology, Greek astrology, Babylonian astrology, Assyrian astrology, anything that I could get, you know, like the older, the more I loved it, you know, this whole sense of connecting, having a shared interest and a shared outlook with somebody who lived hundreds or thousands of years ago, and still feeling like, I just know exactly how you feel. I feel it today, you know, that timelessness. So I'd done a lot of research into a book, which never got published, by the way. 6 months came and went, and so we forgot all about that. But I was writing a book called The Heritage of the Stars. And this book, I would say, was 90% finished in 1995, 1996. And it was all about the early origins of astrology, the Egyptian influence, the Babylonians, and how it went through to the Greeks, and how that went through to the Arabic period, and blah, blah, blah. And what I wrote about in the houses was actually originally one chapter, was chapter 8 from that work. And well, I knew that there was a lot of stuff that I was doing at that time that was very controversial, because nobody else was teaching it, or teaching it in that way. And so, to be honest, that's the reason why that book never got published, because I remember thinking, this is so, you know, what I'm putting in this book is so different from what everybody's hearing, that I'm worried that I'm not qualified to, you know, be putting this out. And people are going to say, well, who are you to write this? Where's your degree on history? Where's your history degree? You know, like, do you even translate Greek? So I was very, it's a shame really, because actually when I reread it recently, it should have been published 20, 30 years ago. That's when most of it was done. But this work was chapter 8. And what I did in order to test out some of the theories is I submitted a series of articles to the Traditional magazine, Traditional Astrology magazine, not the Traditional Astrologer, the Mountain Astrologer magazine. And so they serialized my introduction to the houses and And so it was good, because I thought, if that doesn't make sense, it makes sense to me, but nobody else is saying this, so I need to get, you know, to test it. And if anybody's got any problem, I'll expose it, they can get back to me. Anyway, nobody had a problem with it. But what happened shortly after that was that I was sent a review copy of a book that was published in French, which had these articles that I'd written in the book, in somebody else's work, that was to be published. And I hadn't even published my own work. And it was quite clearly not only a more or less a word-for-word translation of my work into French, but it was also using my diagrams. So I, you know, wrote to the publisher at the time and said, this is my work. And they, you know, they eventually said, yes, we can see that you've had your copyright infringed in at least 5 different places. And they offered to pulp this book, but I said, no, I'm happy for you to have it in the French, as long as you put a sticker in or something saying it is my work and it's been included with my permission. Because what I didn't want to happen, and what I realized was likely to happen, was that shortly afterwards, people would assume that these were not ideas that were original to me, but they were ideas that I copied from the other person who published first. So as a result of that, I very, very quickly, you know, gathered the material together and put it, you know, I got it as an Asala publication for the Houlding of the, you know, of the sky, and put it into book form, just purely, really, I guess, so that I could, you know, preserve my copyright. And then it went, you know, it sold quite a few, and then I thought, I think I got scope to, you know, run up 1,000. So I did. It was like a very small, but the original publication was quite small, so it was just like the Asala publication with a better cover, a bit better, and professionally printed up 1,000, and it only sold dribs and drabs, you know, copy here, copy there, nothing much. So after if you remember, I dropped out of astrology and went, as the cellar closed down, had my operation, I was working in business, and it must have been, in fact, I've got a copy here, so I won't be able to tell you when it was, that Margaret, 2006, Margaret
Margaret Cahill, yeah,
got in
of
touch and
the
said,
Wessex Astrologer.
yeah, nobody can get a hold of a copy of your book. Would you mind if we reprinted it? And I was like, yeah, fine. Yeah, no problem to me. I'm not doing anything with it. So then she created the Wessex, and she said, I think it needs, it should have an introduction. It should have a bit more of this or a bit more of that. So that was good because I didn't have any editor working with me. So she gave me some, like, I think you should have a diagram here and put a forward in, blah, blah, blah. And so she published it, and then it got translated into, I mean, it's been translated into many languages, but it's really only in the last few years that the sales of, the last few years, couple of years in particular, the sales have really taken off. It's just, like I wrote a book, nobody buys it, but I wrote one. But now, there does seem to be a lot of interest and demand in it. So I always think, wow, just that little chapter 8. I'm glad he took my work when he did, because if he didn't, I wouldn't have published none of it. So it's funny how life works out.
Okay. So I think that's the final thing, that we are coming to your accolades, especially from the Astrological Association. And I'm sure no astrologer really expects to kind of get awards for their contributions. No one works looking or expect, no one works to get awards, but still, I'm sure it has to mean something.
Yeah,
Um,
I did expect to get that one, actually.
oh, that's great. Maybe you're a good
I was
astrologer.
surprised to realise that,
For
well,
sure.
first of all, I'm a horror astrologer. I'm not totally out of sync with, like good times, bad times, times when I will get,
Okay.
good times. But yeah, no, I think at the time, like, for example, with the Charles Harvey Award, well, why not? Why not? I'd spent a lifetime of contributing and arguing because, as well as the publications, I've always been very active on committees and places arguing the cause for astrology. There's been a lot of background stuff, like arguing Wikipedia and propaganda. So yeah, I guess without any sense of egotism, by the time that I got the Charles Harvey Award, for example, I did feel that all things, it wasn't too much of a surprise, but it was still very lovely. But it also came at a time when I thought, and hopefully that is good enough to get that kind of recognition, because I think I probably peaked. There will be more to come, but with everything, the long hours, the many long hours, and not expecting anything really other than to do something good with astrology. So yeah, there's been some nice awards. I was given I had very nice reception in Italy, and I was given, that was probably my first award, was I was given this, I can't say the word, Yavahanga Award. It was some kind of award for international contribution to international astrology, and it was that was a lovely thing. And
The
then I got
UAC.
the UAC on research. Yeah, I mean, I personally, and the year that I was up for nomination, I wasn't able to attend the event to get it. But personally, that year, I think James Houlding was up, and I would have liked it to have gone to James. I felt he gave a lifetime of service and commitment to astrology, and he was such an unassuming astrologer that was never there for the attention. He was only ever there for the study, for the scholarship, for the love and the investment. So had I been a voter on the year that I won the award, I would not have given it to me. I would have given it to James in recognition of the long lifetime commitment that he gave. But still, I wasn't too surprised when I did get it, because I knew my own chart and I knew the event, and I knew it was a moment of recognition for me, and I knew there was a lot of Venus energy around, and I was the only female on the program, so it didn't astrologically, it didn't come as a surprise, and it was lovely. But still, you are right what you say. There is something that drives you to do what you do. And I think by the time that I started to receive awards, the days when I had done this kind of thing in the hopes of receiving awards, they were long gone. You know, they were in my youth. They were like, it would be nice one year, to win an award like that would be lovely. But then I'd gone past that. So it wasn't, it was nice, but it's not a big thing. I believe that we do what we do regardless, and whilst it makes for a nice social occasion, really it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you get the claps, if you get the boos. You just do what you love doing and do it well.
Sure. So I think that pretty much brings us, we probably covered most of the things, but the last thing that I wanted to ask you is like, I mean, everyone has their own way, everyone finds their own way, and everyone has their own methods of doing astrology and being an astrologer, but uh, everyone finds it by themselves. But do you want to say something on how they should actually find what they want to be and how they want to be as an astrologer in terms of sharing knowledge to the community?
Well, I think, I mean, first of all, when you're training, it starts with your sources. When you're starting out, it starts with the information you're taking in. And I think that, you know, like with the course that we do with the STA school, we say for that, it's actually, it's available to any astrologer that knows the basics. You know, if you know your signs, your aspects, your houses, you can start this course. But no matter how advanced you are, we're going to take you back from the beginning and rework everything, because, you know, because we will teach you in a way where everything fits together and makes sense. So getting good information is really important. And I know that as a teacher, I can more easily teach somebody who is new to the subject than teach somebody who has been taught something another way. So if they've been taught and they think they know it, but it's not the way that it is in the tradition, then I have to detangle that. There's twice as much work, because first of all, I have to take that knowledge that is contradicting with the system out of your brain. So, you know, starting off from good sources and thinking things through is important. So the technique and the philosophies and the principles are so important. But still, there is this this process, as I said, by which you start to. I am forgetting what you asked me.
No, I think you're going on the right direction. I just wanted to ask you, like, is there an advice that you would give to kind of in terms of how people should find their way of being not a great astrologer or not a successful astrologer, but to be
no, quiet. I got it now.
but really,
yeah.
in
So
terms of
first
how
of all,
to contribute to the community.
yeah. So first of all, to learn well, and to study and to fill up, because it's a language. So it's like any language. The more words you use, the more, you know, you can draw from. But in order to use it well, and there is a point at which it stops being just another study, it turns into magic. You know, to make that alchemical transition, then there is something about, I believe, a point where we accept that, what do we want to do with this? I want to serve something with it. I want to use it. And I think there is a spiritual alignment, you know, heart, body, and soul with the cosmos. I'm ready to use this. Use me. And if you don't open up your heart in a, you know, in a sense of humility, I don't want it because I want to master the world. I mean, years ago, I had a student who wanted to, do a course with me. And I said, what is the reason that you want to teach this? And his response was, because I want to be psychic, because psychic people have more power and I want to be able to control people. And, and I thought, this isn't for you. Because, when we engage in this, there's times when what we do will make us want to cry. There's times when we know we can uplift people. There's times when we share their pain. And if you are not of a mentality that you want to help and you want to serve, not just a cause, but the cosmos itself, and be acting as an astrological agent, an illuminator for cosmic will, then I think it messes with your head. I think that, first of all, it doesn't reveal its mysteries to you. You don't get the insight. So this is such a strange subject. And without getting too esoteric, I mean, we have to develop on so many different levels. We have to develop our knowledge, our awareness, our understanding of technique. We have to develop our wisdom. We have to develop our emotional fortitude, because some of the situations that we deal with are heartbreaking. And we have to develop, the skill of communication and how to, to convey things. There's so many skills that are involved in being an astrologer. It is probably the most humbling study there is, in terms of this will stretch you and expose you in every way as being a human being. And human beings are vulnerable, but human beings are also godlike, and we can soar the skies, but we will also, this study will also take you to the pits. It will show you every element of life, the good and the bad, the sorrow, the joy. And so I don't know that I know how to answer that question, except to say that this is not your everyday study. This is something that is a life vocation. When we teach our course, recently I said to one of the tutors, we have a commercial commodity and we have to be professional in how we, sell our course and how we trade with customers. We have to be politically aware. We have to be, sensitive to politics and shifting moods. But at the end of the day, we have to preserve this thing that is sacred. We're not selling a course on learning how to crochet. This is something that is so timeless. It can't be rewritten every time there is a shift in attitude. It's got to be, we've got to identify the core values. And, like I'm thinking of the conversation, for example, like people don't like the use of the words masculine and feminine. So I'm seeing people like suggesting that we take those words out and we replace them with diurnal or nocturnal or whatever. Whereas my position is the terms masculine and feminine have been there right from, they were used even before they were associated with genders. They have been given to genders, but they have philosophical principles about the sun and the moon and the role of, the solar activity and the lunar activity. And and if there is a political problem, it's because it's not being understood that they are not identifying genders. It doesn't matter what sex you are. You can be a woman, but you can still be more masculine astrologically. And so my preservation is, don't rewrite the terms, increase the understanding to those who have the understanding to understand. Because on one level, you can teach the technique, but what you cannot teach is wisdom, discretion. Cannot teach those. They have to be something that are encouraged to be drawn out, or the astrologer has to step up and claim them. So I guess, part of this is just letting astrologers realize that for as much as you can be taught by somebody else, for as much as you can buy a book and learn this, or you can do a course and you can learn that, you will never know it unless you step up and claim it. Sure. Unless you open yourself to it and unless you decide to master it. So we're all collective. We've got a great collective community, but it's a community made up of 100% individuals. We are all individuals. We're all making our own little cosmic systems. Sure. I hope that hasn't completely confused you and all your listeners.
No, I think there can never be an answer, but it's just to kind of draw some inspiration from what you say for that particular thing. So I really don't know what an answer is to that question, because there is no one single answer. It's just inspiration that people can draw from what you say. So,
And I guess that another thing is that if you've been doing astrology and you've been learning astrology and studying astrology, most of us at some stage get periods where we get a little dry and then suddenly it doesn't have the thrill. And most of us go through that. And when you have those, you need to learn to step back, because what you've done is you've sucked your creativity dry. And without creativity, astrology is not performing at its best. So sometimes you have to step back and you just have to be more creative on a creative level, and then it comes back to you. And then there is more power in it, in my
sure,
opinion.
knowing when to take a break. So it's important. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was great, and it's pretty much the end of the discussion. If you don't have anything else to say, or anything, yeah, I think that brings us towards the end of the discussion. Uh, Thank you very much for joining. It was
You're very
joyful, right?
welcome.
And
It's been a pleasure to talk about myself.
sure, thanks for
And
joining. And I hope,
thank you very much.
yeah, thanks.
I'll go and get a cup of tea.